Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of DevOps Unlocked. Today we will be using the PrivateLink in AWS to connect to our instances in Systems Manager. So here's an example diagram of what we are building today. If you go left to right, you'll notice we are deploying an endpoint / private link that will keep our traffic within the AWS ecosystem. Some benefits to using a private link is that the traffic will remain within your VPC, allowing for better security posture when handling compliance and regulations like PCI or HIPAA. Also, less infrastructure to manage. For example, this doesn't require a peering connection or an internet gateway. Okay, so let's begin building out the private link. So in your AWS console, you'll want to select VPC and scroll down on the left side and choose Endpoints. So clicking Endpoints, if you haven't created any previously, it'll be blank. So if so, click the Create Endpoint button and make sure for service category you have AWS services selected. And then in the search box, we are going to be searching for 3 separate services. But to begin, I will start with SSM messages. So I'll click that and I'll scroll down to VPC. And this is where I want to apply or expose the certain subnets to these services. And for demo purposes, I'm going to leave all my subnets selected. You want to make sure that the enable DNS name checkbox is selected. And then we will need to build out a separate security group. Specifically, we'll need to allow port 443 or HTTPS to be exposed. This is the port that these services rely on. So let's create some inbound rules here. And we'll select HTTPS as such. And I'm going to do it for both IPv4 and IPv6 just to be safe. And IPv6. Everything else looks good here, and I'm just going to add a tag and just give us a name real quick. SSM PrivateLink SG for the security group. And just specify demo. And I forgot to provide a description, so I'll just do that here real quick. Perfect. I think now we're ready to set the security group. Great. And if we head back to VPC, I will select the security group I just created. Just give me 1 second here while I do so. And click that. And hit the close button. Yeah, that is selected. And scroll down. I'll leave the policy just open as it is already written. And I'll click the create endpoint. And this should take probably about a minute or 2 to create, and then we can move on to the other 2. Okay, so I'm going to just repeat the same steps. However, I'll target 2 more services. I'm only going to do this once just to save time. So let me click create endpoint, and for the next endpoint, I'm going to select, I'll search for SSM or EC2, and I'm going to select the EC2 messages. However, we will also need to deploy the SSM endpoint as well. So I'll just, like I said, keep everything as I had it previously. Since I created the security group, I can just scroll down here and select the one that I just created and remove any other ones. I'm only just in need of port 443. Keep everything the same and click create endpoint. And so I'll let this create, and while that's creating, I'm just going to present the 3 endpoints you'll want to have configured up here on my screen. So here they are. It'll be SSM messages, SSM, and EC2 messages. So now that that's been presented, let's just move on and configure our EC2 instance. However, before we do so, if you guys can click the subscribe and the notification bell, I would greatly appreciate it. I really enjoy making these videos, and so that would definitely help me out a lot. Okay, so we're going to build out an EC2 instance. I demonstrated this in a previous video, and if you're familiar with this process already, go ahead and skip probably the next 30 or so seconds. So I will select T2 Micro and click Configure Instance Details. For the auto assign public IP, I just want to demonstrate that we are not relying on the internet to get access to Systems Manager. So I'm going to set that to disabled. And for the IAM rule, I had created this previously. I will select SSM. So click the next, add storage, and I'm going to just keep this at the 8 gigabytes. I will add a tag with a key of name, and I'll just name my instance SSM Demo Private Link. And I'll click Configure Security Groups. Just to demonstrate I don't need SSH access, I'm going to click the X and then Review and launch the instance. Alright, now that our instance is ready, let's head over to the Systems Manager menu in the AWS console. So I'll select Systems Manager, and on the left side I'm going to scroll down to about the middle, and I will click the Session Manager menu. And I don't have a session, so I'm going to click Start Session, and as you can see here, a running target instance is the one EC2 instance we just set up. So I'll click Start Session, and here I am able to access the EC2 instance that I had just deployed. Okay, so one step you can take to ensure that your private link is indeed actually private is by doing DNS lookups. So I just want to note that I am in the availability zone 1B for my EC2 instance. So if you head over to your endpoint and scroll to the bottom menu here on the right, I'm just going to highlight this particular endpoint that was generated by AWS, and I can just head back to the instance that I had created. And if I do an NS lookup on this endpoint, you'll notice that the IP address is a 172.31, which is the IP CIDR block of my default VPC. And then if I do an NS lookup on the specific AWS provided endpoint, which is SSM messages.us-east1.amazonaws.com, you'll notice the same IP is in the pool of other IPs, and these other IP addresses are the other subnets that I had previously selected earlier on in this video. So let's discuss some troubleshooting scenarios, and we're going to take this approach a bit differently. We're going to actually purposely break the private link to the Systems Manager. And so for the first scenario I want to cover is what happens when you launch an EC2 instance. You have your rules set up correctly, however you go to Session Manager and attempt to look for that instance and it is actually missing. So let's cover what happens in this particular scenario. Okay, so as I mentioned, we are going to work backwards for this troubleshooting. What I mean by that is, it is working on my end, but I'm going to purposely break it, and then we can roll through the troubleshooting steps. So one cause for your EC2 instance not being available in Session Manager is that you may be missing a private link. So on my screen, you'll see I have 3 of these in total. So I'll go ahead and remove 2 out of the 3, and when I launch an EC2 instance, I expect it to not be presented in Session Manager. So there you have it. I deleted 2 of these 3 endpoints. So now let's launch an EC2 instance. Alright, so I'll go ahead and click Launch Instances, and I'll select Amazon Linux and T2 Micro. Configure Instance Details. I'm going to remove the auto-assign public IP just to prove I don't want it connecting to the internet. IAM rule I'll set to SSM. Disk I'll leave at 8, and for the name I'll just do SSM Demo and then Private Link and Test Troubleshooting, just so we know this is different. And I'll remove SSH and launch our instance. Okay, so you can see the instance has completed. So if I head to Systems Manager and scroll down on the left here and click Session Manager and Start Session, you'll see that that instance is not being presented to me. So I'll click refresh a couple of times, and yeah, so it's not there. So what we need to do now is add the private link endpoints that we are missing. Okay, so to do that, what we're going to do is head back over to our VPC, and on the left side we're going to click the endpoints and click create endpoint. And we already have SSM messages, so what we want to do is add the missing two, which I demonstrated earlier in this video, but the one we're missing is SSM. I'm going to specify all subnets. Again, based on your environment, you want to select the subnets that are most appropriate for the infrastructure that you're setting up. I'm going to demonstrate, I only need this for the 1B availability zone, so I'll uncheck everything else. And then for the security group, we already created this, so I'll just scroll down and select the SSM private link that I created earlier in this video, and scroll down. I'll keep the policy as is, and I'll click create endpoint. And now we have to repeat this for the third endpoint, which is the EC2. And given that we've gone through this exercise a few times as part of this tutorial, I'm going to speed up this part of the process, and then we can get back over to our session manager and confirm that the new instance has been added. Okay, so all three private link endpoints are available, and since I have a tab open already in Systems Manager, I'm just going to hit this refresh button over here, and as you can see, the instance that I had launched earlier is now available. So clicking Start Session, I am able to access my Amazon Linux terminal, and so I think we can now mark this issue resolved. Let's move on. Okay, so let's recap everything we just worked through, and the solution here was to add the missing private link endpoints. As I demonstrated, in order to access your EC2 instances using Session Manager over a private link, you need to ensure that the three specified endpoints are configured and available. So let's move on and begin more troubleshooting, and this one will be a bit shorter to work through. And that scenario is this. Say you want to access your EC2 through Session Manager. You're able to start a session, but when you get into that session, you have a blank terminal and it fails to load. What do? For starters, you resolve it. But anyhow, I just want to show you what this will look like. So if I click Start Session and I select an instance that is running, it looks healthy, click Start Session, and as you can see, it is blank. And here's another view of what it may look like at some point or another if this issue persists. And as you can see, I've selected the instance, and clicking Start Session doesn't do anything. So let's work through resolving this. Okay, so when we see this issue, it's typically related to a security group that is attached to these private links or endpoints being modified. So over here in this VPC tab that I have opened, if I scroll down to the security group that is attached to these endpoints, you'll see that SSH was inserted over HTTPS. So let me just revert these settings back to allow for 443 access. And if I hit the save rules, I'll then go back to my other tab where Systems Manager is loaded, and I'll click the Start Session. And here you can see I'm able to select my instance, and clicking Start Session, I'm now into my Linux machine successfully. So that resolves this issue. And that is it for this video. So thank you guys for watching. I hope you learned a lot. And if you can, please hit the like and subscribe, and I'll see you back next week.